Welcome back to Tied Together, the technology and business podcast brought to you by Cohesis. My name is Kostov Bhattacharya and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Cohesis, and we have a really exciting show today where we'll be exploring how businesses can develop data literacy. But why is data literacy important? Well, for starters, it'll empower your business to back key strategic initiatives or carry out informed decision-making, develop a deeper understanding of customers and employees, and fundamentally give you the power to react to economic changes and keep your organization evolving and growing. On today's show, I have two data experts joining me to share their insights and advice, Helen Blaikie and Hanan Belarbi.
Thanks. So I'm Helen Blaikie and I work as a freelance consultant promoting data strategy and data literacy within organisations. I've worked for large organisations over the last few years doing exactly that. However, now I work as a freelance consultant.
Hi, Kostov. Thanks for having me. My background, I studied statistics and econometrics at university, so it was quite natural for me to work in a company that dealt with data. So I started my career working with consultancy, specialized in the pharma industry and dealing with a lot of prescription data. So it was my first exposure to big data. At that time, we were using SAS and SPSS and obviously SQL, but no R, no Python. Later on, I moved into the marketing world where I was manipulating behavioral data, so either campaign data, CRM data. Moved to the agency world, worked for Wonderman, worked for Nick Communications, where I headed the data team. Moved later on to RGA, now working still at IPG for Kiniso, which is tech and data consultancy. Naturally, I've been dealing with data all my career. I started in data companies. I moved in companies that were not necessary. They were not data company, but they needed to have a data capability and to embed data into the company. And now I'm back into a data company.
The world is full of data, and by some measures, we are now producing more data every 24 hours than all the data that is ever created by humanity in the lead up to the early 2020s. But let's start off by exploring why data is becoming important for organizations.
I think it has become increasingly more important, particularly as you look at the present time. We're in the middle of a global pandemic and organizations need to understand what is happening in the global marketplace. They need to understand what's happening in their organizations, and then they need to be able to respond to these occurrences that are happening. They can only do that if they understand the business, and to understand their business, I believe that they need data to be able to do that, because what that means is that an organisation can become evidence-based in their approach rather than just using gut feel. I think previously, as organisations didn't change at the same rate as they do today, organisations could get away with gut feel. However, more and more today, particularly given the digital nature of the marketplace, data is absolutely imperative to being able to understand that and then being able to react in an agile and adaptive manner.
Once the decision has been made to create a data literate workforce, companies have to start by building a solid grounding. Establishing a strong data vision that captures the minds of leaders and encourages buy-in is a crucial first step, but beyond this, many other things need to be considered. Hanan and Helen both take us through their respective approaches.
My answer might sound obvious, but it's a step that most of the companies and organizations are missing. It's an assessment. You need to assess your company, but not only an assessment of what is the technology that we have, what is the data that we currently have, or do we have people who can manipulate this data? It's about how literate is my workforce and being able to assess that across the different business units. Because if you don't understand it from day one, it will be really difficult to embed data into the organization.
And now let's get Helen's take on it.
The first thing is an organisation needs to really understand, firstly, where they are today and then where they want to go to in the future. They need to establish the baseline. And to do that, I think there's several things that need to be in place. Do they have a data strategy, first and foremost? Do they have a vision of what they want to do with their data? So really understanding the purpose of the data, and really data literacy is an enabler to actually fulfilling that data strategy. I think that's really important to say. So as an organisation, do you really understand what you want from that? The size of organisation would dictate the complexity of actually getting to that vision, because to be a compelling vision which is actually bought in to by the organisation, it needs stakeholder involvement. So the size of an organisation and the number of stakeholders that are involved, there's a correlation between the two. The larger the organisation, obviously, the more stakeholders are involved. So therefore, I think the time to actually build that becomes longer the larger the organisation. With smaller organisations, you can just get a few guys in a room, have a conversation, determine where you want to go, and job done. With a larger organisation, it's just not that simple. The end results should be the same ultimately, but the way to get there is slightly different. When I'm developing a data strategy for an organisation, the starting point and the baseline is often through a data maturity assessment. So really understanding the organisation in terms of how they use data. Do they use their data? Do they trust the data? Do they answer the right questions and ask the right questions of data? Or do executives, for example, use gut feel when they're actually making decisions in organisations? And often those gut feel observations could be correct. However, sometimes I think having the data to back that up can help with the doubters in the organisation and bring them on board, because it's very much evidence-based. The other thing is to look at whether employees are comfortable challenging the executive using data as well. So is data talked about in meetings? How many times as a data leader are you invited into the boardroom to talk about data? That really gives you some evidence as to where the organisation is in terms of their advocacy of data. And then indeed within roles as well, how not everybody needs to be a data scientist, that's clear. So when you're developing data literacy, it's really understanding the capabilities that people need within a role, rather than turning everybody into a data scientist. And that's certainly not what data literacy is. It's just ensuring that people, whatever their role, can interpret data, can understand the data that they need, can actually storytell with data, can argue with data, and can analyse data. And it sounds very simple, but it's really understanding for each role what are the levels of data literacy that's needed. Business users might need simple reports just to review relevant data so that they can act quickly, for example, whereas a data scientist will need to be extremely comfortable with manipulating data. So there are varying degrees of data capabilities that are needed within an organisation. And I think once you've assessed that data literacy of the current state, then you really need to understand where you want to be and what the time frame is around that. And then what I found really helpful in some organisations, certainly larger organisations, I would say, is preparing capability roadmaps. So doing a gap analysis in terms of skills and capability, and then developing a roadmap for each individual role as opposed to individual, and then building in those capabilities within job and role profiles so that when people are interviewed, it's considered as part of their skill set, and then being able to set up programs to be able to encourage that culture of learning.
Establishing and then communicating the reason behind the change you're trying to drive is paramount. Organizations often dive straight into working out the what to do and how to do it. For example, what sort of training do my staff need? Do I need to invest in new IT systems? Which ones? How do I hire the people I need? And so on. But so often, organizations pay lip service to the why. Helen takes us through her perspective and explains why focusing on the why is so crucial on your journey to data literacy.
Always the why, always the why core stuff. The how and the what can only come once you understand what you want to do and why. How does using data actually apply to everybody within the organisation, from C-suite all the way down to the shop floor, essentially. So what is in it for them and why should they do that? So you would hope in an organisation everybody is working towards the same strategic goal, a business goal rather than a data goal. So really understanding what those strategic outcomes are for the organisation. And then once those are determined, then really understanding and how can data solve the problems or actually enable that strategic outcome to be fulfilled. So I think that's really the place to start. It needs to be driven from the top. There needs to be senior sponsorship and exec leadership and really buying into data literacy. And I've had examples of where that's been done well and where it's been delegated down to the tea lady or the tea boy, because the exec may sponsor that, but they're not really interested. So it just gets delegated down because it's seen as a data team problem rather than a C-suite problem or indeed opportunity, as most data strategies and literacy programs are a huge opportunity for the organisation.
Hanan highlights the challenges that companies face when they're not fluent in data or when a data-centric mindset is not built into their DNA, and shares her thoughts on how to go about driving the cultural change needed to adopt a more data-led strategy.
I think you have to pick your battles, right? You can't in one day make a company. A company is not born when it's not in their DNA suddenly to become fluent, right? I think you can start with key business units that, are probably a priority in terms of impact that they may have to help drive the data fluency. But it goes through time, in fact. I don't have a successful story where I can say, wow, they became fluent, because I think it is taking time to be able to do that. But the success is, for me, whoever has been exposed to the initiatives that have been undertaken into the company, they have changed. So regardless of if I stay in the company, if they move elsewhere, both individuals are more data literate. They are more comfortable, they understand better the importance, even if everybody acknowledges the importance of it, but they don't really understand the why. And that makes it easier, because if every data leaders does that, at the end, you're just educating more and more of the workforce, and regardless of the movement of the workforce, it's going to be easier for companies to improve the fluency in terms of data.
Hanan and Helen have both already mentioned the importance of carrying out baseline assessments of where organisational data literacy lies. When you start to analyse the responses that people give to your surveys, a disjointed picture often emerges of departments who you might have thought had to be data literate to carry out their function are often not, or that people often have contradictory views of what data means.
So in a large organisation that I worked in a few years ago, we just couldn't define the definition of a customer. What is a customer? You would think that would be the most simple thing in a customer-focused organisation. But for one department, it's completely different to another department. So you can imagine the conversations around the exec table when you present a report that shows customer sales. Well, what does that mean? Is from the business development director would have a completely different view to the customer service people, who would have a different view to the operational teams, for example. This is where I think the data literacy has to be underpinned by a true data strategy, where you've got very good governance models around your data, for example. But not just that, but those are actually communicated through to people within the organisation. I think a lot of people think that data literacy is just around developing a citizen data scientist, for example, or a data community. It's far more wide-ranging than that. It's ensuring that people understand the data, they understand the data ownership, they understand the roles of people like data stewards, which will be part of a data governance framework, for example. Everybody's very clear as to what their role is and what their responsibilities are, so that they are supported in those roles. So I think it's far more wide-ranging than just setting up some training, for example.
Fundamentally, Every business that exists on Earth is about people. They drive the success or failure of a business, and when faced with a new frontier, many people dig their heels in to maintain the status quo. The oft-used phrase, "Why fix it if it isn't broken?" chimes down the corporate corridors of industry, and so one of the largest challenges that any data champion will face in an organization is driving cultural change and sustaining it beyond the initial phase. Helen explains why organizational cultural change is hard and how you can start to approach it in various ways.
It is absolutely hard. I think that's the first thing to say. Anybody can have a strategy and anybody could have a data literacy program, but actually enacting that cultural change, you need to find the data heroes in the business, I think. Again, in an organisation that I was working with, it was really understanding, taking time to interview lots of people across the organisation. And what we found is that there were people who get it within various departments that understand data and really want to use data, but actually are quite frustrated because they don't have the accessibility to the data that they want, or indeed they don't have a voice within the organisation. So it's really trying to find those data heroes, those data champions, whatever you like to call them, to really become your advocates. It's almost a tribal leadership approach to try and get more of the same like-minded people and then roll that out across the organisation, making it interesting and making it tangible. So I'm a finance background person rather than a marketeer, so I don't like the fluffy approach of we don't have anything that is tangible. So where are the use cases? What are the tangible things that we're going to deliver? We might have a grand vision, but actually we'll start small and really start to develop some specific examples and then roll those out. Don't get me wrong, I've messed up loads of times. I've had huge data councils where I've tried to get 60 people in a room to get them excited about data, and that's just chaos. You need to start small, start with your advocates, start with various departments, and then really start to build that out. And when people see that you're delivering, they then become excited, and that's when they want to be involved as well, because everybody wants to be part of something new and exciting. It's just human nature.
But mindset shift is only part of the cultural change that needs to happen. When it comes to empowering people to learn new skills, when they've been doing one thing all their career, it can often seem like an insurmountable change.
To be able to empower people, they need to be able to see and touch and understand the data themselves. So I am a great believer in ensuring accessibility of data to all of the audiences who need that, and whether that's through self-service visualization tools are a means to an end, but absolutely you need to have something that is fit for purpose so that it's simple to use, it's easy to use, and actually people understand what they're doing with it. So I think you need the environment. Clearly you'll have role-based access controls so that it's very specific to the people who are using it, rather than confusing them with a plethora of data, which is very, very hard to understand. So I think that is absolutely key to empower people. I think you can look at various models as well within an organisation. So depending on the level of data maturity within an organisation will determine how you structure your data team and where your data champions will lie. For example, if you're very low on the data maturity curve, it might be sensible initially to have a centralised approach. And what I've done previously is had a centralised approach, but then found people within the organisation who actually want to get into data. I set up a data academy using the apprenticeship levy. So it was free money to the organisation essentially, using that apprenticeship levy funding then to sponsor some of those advocates through data analysis courses. And that was really successful because they were actually in their own departments. Many of them wanted to come and work in the data team within my department, but they actually stayed where they were, and then they would come in to take projects within our department and then go back out, and almost it becomes a federated model quite quickly because you have people trained in the right approach and the best practice to do things, but then they can go into their individual departments and use the data because they understand the data better than the centralised team could, to be able to then answer some of those business problems which historically would come in to the central team and basically just not be prioritised. So it's really about empowering each of the individual business areas to be able to answer those business questions themselves.
How do you measure the success of your data literacy program? Of course, you harness data to demonstrate the return on investment.
It's absolutely critical that you can measure the success, because if you can measure that, then you can go and ask for more funding, and the board and the executive are more likely to sponsor you to do further projects. Being from a finance background, I guess, return on investment is always a good place to start, but it's very, very difficult to articulate what that means sometimes with a data project. So sometimes it's worth splitting it into, is there incremental revenue growth, and can we determine what that might be? And that might be done through traditional methods, through A/B tests, for example, to really understand the true success of a campaign. For example, it could be about cost reduction, it could be about efficiencies. The success of a data project, for me, is always working with the business owner to understand what that success looks like, holding the business owner to account, as well as it's not the data team's project, it's actually business sponsored. So ensuring that the business is actually held to account in terms of how it's been delivered. I think celebrating success is absolutely key as well. So talking about the success of the project, whether that's internally or externally, being able to tell the story of what you've actually delivered really then helps promote that data culture. And also it helps to motivate the teams as well. So the more success they see, the more motivated they get. And it also finally helps to attract talent as well, to ensure that you're constantly making sure you've got the best talent in the organisation. So I think all of those things are absolutely key in terms of measuring the success of projects.
There are so many intriguing examples of companies who have successfully led the market in their sector, largely on the basis of harnessing the power of data and using the insights and predictive capabilities of data to establish new business models and launching new, genuinely transformative services or products for their clients and customers. Take Citymapper, for example, which started out several years ago as an app that helped you get from A to B via public transport. As it amassed a formidable picture of how people moved around large cities, they discovered underserved communities where access to public transport was lacking. This enabled them to launch experimental bus routes, but without the data to back up the rationale behind launching such services in the first place, Citymapper would never have been successful. Helen explains how businesses need to nurture data talent in order to be successful at driving up data literacy within their companies.
We've seen a couple of examples with major organisations recently in the press, a few large examples where they've set up data academies, they've set up data science boot camps, so they're really starting to create the skills and expertise within the organisation. I know that if you look at some of the research Gartner have been saying for a long time, that actually 50% of organisations will lack the data skills to be able to use the data efficiently and effectively. And those data skills are just not out there in the marketplace. They cannot be bought in the marketplace easily. So you have to create your own. You have to develop your own talent. And I'm a huge advocate for developing within. So I like some of the large organisations who have done this. Marks and Spencer's, for example, I think they were out in the press some time ago. We're developing a data academy. People like Airbnb have done that too. And also the financial service institutions as well. I think there's a huge need in the financial services industry for data literate people. And I think lots of banks, for example, have invested money in those organisations, as indeed I know HomeServe have just developed an apprenticeship as well, not just in data, but they've just launched an apprenticeship foundation, which is really exciting to see organisations like that who have actually launched data academies.
To wrap up, I asked Hanan and Helen what they both thought about the future of data and what it holds for business.
I think the future is now first. It's like the digital transformation. Everybody's been talking for digital transformation for the last 20 years, and I still hear it. I'm like, guys, it's past. If you're not digital right now, it's like, I don't understand the point of it. We're still talking about we need to do transformation. Transformation happened 20 years ago and you miss your train. So the pandemic had just accelerated this trend. So I'm like, so it's the same for data. There's no data industry, right? We are in a data economy. I think data is touching absolutely every aspect of our lives. Every aspect, every industry, every brand, that they like it or not. And I think the ones who will make the most of it are the ones who are not necessarily like, oh, I'm developing AI because it's a big word or things like that. It's about understanding how you can grasp this data economy or this information economy or whatever people they want to call it. But the world is heading where there's a lot of information out there. And I like to look at it as an individual. Imagine it's a bit like the series Black Mirror, right? Imagine you have people and everything that we do, in fact, is leaving a data trace. Imagine like a cartoon where each individual, they have all the data floating around them. This is what is happening. We don't see it, right? And then you have brands who are trying to grab this data here and there. The reality of what is happening is each individuals will have a choice to monetize this data and to sell it to whatever they want. So I think this economy will take a proper marketplace, and this is where we're heading. We move to let's capture our own data, to there's an economy that is happening right now that we don't see, that is not tangible, that is it's happening. And then how the data leaders will be able to help organization and brands to be able to understand or be part of this marketplace that is happening around the data economy and help the individuals. For me, it is the future. We're not going to stop having laptops or application or whatever.
Data will only grow, I think that it's fair to say, and data literacy has to grow with that. So as reading and writing is important to us, I think being data literate will also become more and more important, because there's lots of buzzwords in the marketplace at the moment: artificial intelligence, machine learning, RPA, you name it. There's lots of acronyms with lots of automation that will be ongoing within the global environment. Some of that has been accelerated with COVID, and I think COVID has forced organisations that were probably teetering on the edge to actually start to invest now and look at new and innovative ways of using data to minimise some of the inefficient processes that have been within organisations, but also to be able to offer a more personalised approach to customers and consumers to be more efficient and effective with their resources, so that they're really tailoring their communications to customers. I think it's absolutely key for any organisation, and it's an expectation of the consumers are a lot more sophisticated than they were 10 years ago, and it's a basic expectation now rather than something that is BAU now, as opposed to something that is new and everybody expects the Amazon experience, everybody expects that personalisation that the Googles, Amazons, Netflix, Facebook of these worlds can deliver. That's just the norm for us as the slightly older generation, but also for all of the guys that are coming through.
I hope you enjoyed today's show about building a data literate workforce. As you can imagine, at Cohesus, we know a thing or two about data and how to harness its power to launch new products and services. If you'd like to speak to us about how we can help you with your data initiative, then contact us via our website at www.cohesus.co.uk. That's www.cohesus.co.uk. Thanks for listening.